I'm Tony Northup, and today we're in Old San Juan, Puerto Rico to test out the Nikon D3300. Let's start by talking about the features. Old San Juan is truly one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and the D3300 was the perfect camera to bring. That detailed sensor gave me plenty of resolution to capture the architecture, colors, and people of this town. I was able to focus plenty fast enough for me to capture the fleeting moments of my daughter playing with the local wildlife. Of course, I had to chase some of the wildlife myself, and the camera's deep dynamic range captured all the detail. During the day, the color rendition looked just fantastic, though at night it got pretty awful by default, but it was nothing that couldn't be rescued, mostly with some processing of the raw files. Leaving the city and exploring the countryside, I kept the D3300 at my side and just captured all of the sights. I would have wished for a little more zoom range in the kit lens, but that really detailed sensor lets me crop in post to get the composition that I originally wanted. Many a time I wished for an articulating screen so to make it a little easier to hold the camera down low or above my head. But the screen was nice and bright, even with my polarized sunglasses on, allowing me to use live view when I wanted a little more unusual composition. Of course, one of my favorite things about Puerto Rico are the people. Now, the D3300, especially in that garish red color, not exactly ideal for discreet street photography. There I would have wished for a smaller mirrorless camera. Time and time again, I took pictures with really high dynamic range, and I wanted to bracket them so I could process them with HDR techniques. And I discovered the D3300 doesn't have bracketing. That's right, it doesn't have bracketing or HDR capabilities, which are pretty much standard from every other vendor. If you want those, you have to go up to the D5300. Of course, we had to ditch the cruise ships and spend some time on a local beach, and even the cheapo kit lens proved quite capable of taking wide sweeping shots as well as more close-up shots. That high-resolution sensor and ISO 100 looked just fantastic. At ISO 100, even zoomed in all the way, the images proved to be clean and noise-free. Even at ISO 400, the images were very usable. You know, here we can see some noise in the background, but I put this on Facebook and it got a ton of likes, so nobody was complaining. Jumping up to ISO 2800 for this selfie, you can see here the noise is pretty bad, but zoomed out full screen it looks okay, just wouldn't stand up to any kind of close inspection. This shot of Chelsea at ISO 6400, again, looks okay zoomed back, but once you get in, the noise is pretty unbearable. Up to ISO 12800 for low light shots, we can see the noise looks okay again full screen, but zoomed in all the way, and yeah, it's pretty unbearable. Here's a handheld night shot showing off both the image stabilization built into the lens and the high ISO capabilities, and I think that looks okay. So to expose this camera to some tougher weather conditions, we'll head back to Connecticut. And we're out in the blizzard of 2014 to test out the weather protection on the Nikon D3300. Now, one of the differences between the low-end D3300 and the high-end cameras, like the D4S that's coming out, are the weather sealing. If you look at the high-end cameras, they all have like rubber seals around all the lenses and every button. And the fact of the matter is, most of us don't need that. People are real worried about taking their camera out in a drizzle, or they're walking around and they think it might sprinkle a little bit. Doesn't so much matter. You can go out in a heavy snow like this and just let it collect on your camera and it'll be just fine. The lens I have here is also not weather sealed. This is a $200 portrait lens. So I'll grab some pictures of my kid over there because that's fun and that's what you want to do, and you want to be able to do that with any camera that you get. Don't baby your cameras too much. Also point out that I'm recording with my Canon 5D Mark III, and that is a weathered sealed camera. But like I said, these lower end cameras are just fine too. So 2 lessons to learn. Don't spend an extra $1,000 on a camera just because you want some weather sealing, unless you're like a war reporter or something. And 2, don't miss out on the great moments in life just because you're afraid of wrecking your camera. It can probably handle a lot more than you think it can. Here, come over here and throw a snowball at me. Okay. Oh. Got me right in the lens. Hit me again. Oh. This is not the camera that people think of when they think of portrait photographers in a studio. What people always do is they go out and they buy a big old Mark III. They drop like $3,000 on a camera body and then a couple of grand on a lens. But you really don't need that for the portraits. After all, if you're in a studio, you're controlling the lighting. So you're always shooting at ISO 100 and you don't need the lower noise that the full frame bodies will give you. You also don't need the shallow depth of field that the full frame sensors give you because you don't need to blur the background because I'm controlling the background. And that's why when you go out and talk to actual portrait photographers, you know that guy who's taking pictures of you at the cruise or the mall photographer, you often see them using super cheap cameras. So let's fire off a few test shots and we'll see how the Nikon does versus the other cameras. Now I'll turn this video camera on. You can see our cameraman Justin over here. He's got the new Olympus OMD and he's using it to film. So this is kind of a dual test. We're testing out these cameras in the studio and we're testing out the video capabilities of that OMD. So in a second we'll actually switch out and try that camera against these others as well. So if any weird video things happen, you can blame the camera, right? Okay, so back to shooting. I'll swap this out and put it on the older model, the D3300. This is the model that the D3300 is replacing. Now the most significant improvement with the D3300 is that they took the anti-aliasing filter off the sensor. Now the 24 megapixel sensor is already awesome, but now the D3300 has basically the same image quality as the 5300 and the 7100. So why would you want to get those more expensive cameras? Well, we'll talk a little bit more about it later. Trying to review the pictures and it's kind of taken forever. One of the first things I'm noticing is that the D3300 generally seems faster than the D3200. It seems to snap into focus a little bit faster. It seems to play back pictures a little faster. You can see I'm still waiting for this guy to pull up the pictures. That could be a couple of different things, but in general it feels just a little bit better. It's also a little bit smaller and lighter. Now besides the camera body, they also changed the lens that comes with the kit. You can see the old original lens versus the new lens. And the new lens is clearly substantially smaller. Another nice trick is that you can hide away the lens element there, so it collapses down to be quite a bit smaller than the old lens was. So how good is the sensor on the D3300? It's perfectly fine for any sort of portrait. In fact, it measures just a hair better than the sensor on my 5D Mark III. That's right, my $3,000 Canon 5D Mark III with a full frame sensor doesn't have quite the image quality of the $600 D5300. So I'm getting a little tangled up with cameras here, but I'll rattle off a few sample pictures with this Canon too. Gotta put my transmitter in the hot shoe. So 24 megapixels, no anti-aliasing filter, that's all you need to get unbelievably sharp shots. But there's one problem in that this lens will only transmit about 9 megapixels of data. That's at least what DxOMark tested it. So you've got a 24 megapixel sensor and a 9 megapixel lens. That means the kit lens that you have with it is not taking advantage of the sensor at all. So you are kind of spending a little bit more if you compare this body against, say, a Canon T3, which you can get for under 400 bucks. You could save yourself about 250 bucks by getting a T3 with its much lower resolution sensor. And that 250 bucks, well, that'll buy you one of those used Alien B lights. And that might do a lot more to improve your photography than having a bunch of unused megapixels. Now, on the other hand, if you plan to buy some professional level prime lenses, this 24 megapixel sensor is going to give you detail that you simply can't get in an APS-C Canon body or even one of the older APS-C Nikon bodies. Oh, and a quick word about the awful color on this Nikon. I bought it in red and I swear it didn't look so bad on Amazon. It looked like it had a matte finish. This looks like Iron Man's camera or something. I if I take this into the bad part of town, I'm definitely going to get robbed, right? This is the opposite of subtle. It's absolutely awful. I thought it might look like a Ferrari or something. It looks like a cheap toy Hot Wheels car, but don't blame the camera because you can get it in black or gray, and the black looks exactly like this D3300. In fact, they almost changed absolutely nothing. So before we move down to the video studio so we can explore the features of these cameras in a little more detail, I'm going to swap cameras with Justin over there so he can try a little bit of filming with this body, and I can try out that Olympus in the studio.
I was just telling Tony, and it also might be my fault partially for not reading the manual for this or anything, but autofocus was really not very good at all when I was filming Tony. I'm sure you saw it drifting in and out of focus. That was also kind of me just trying to adjust it manually after getting fed up with doing it with the viewfinder here, but yeah, it was just kind of so-so.
What did you think of the electronic viewfinder?
Oh, it looks great. It's actually phenomenal, and I prefer it to using it the live view here. Yeah, the colors and everything look fantastic in it.
So now let's head into the video studio and talk more about the features of the two Nikon cameras. I'll take the lenses off here so that we can compare the various features. You'll see that very little has changed between the two bodies. The buttons are even in pretty much the same places. They both have this awful white light here to help it focus. I hate that light. On the top, as we look at it here, again, really no differences. They move the mic from the left side here over to the right side, and I'll flip it around so we can see the backs. Looking at the back, you can see there's a slight adjustment to the buttons here, but otherwise all the buttons are about the same. Set up a simple test here to compare the sharpness of the D3300 on the left to the D3300 on the right. This is using my Rokinon 85mm prime lens, which is considered one of the sharpest lenses that DxO Mark has ever tested. You know, zoomed in at 1:1 here at, make sure you're looking at this at 1080p. Right away, the D3300 seems sharper, which is remarkable considering it's the same lens, same settings, everything. Let's zoom in to 3:1 just to make it easier for everybody to see. Zoomed in tight, you know, you can see the actual texture of the printing at this resolution, and consistently just looks sharper and higher contrast on the D3300, which is what you'd expect from removing that filter. Look up here, compare this strand of hair here to the strand of hair over here. You just see far more detail. I'll also say it seems like there's a lot less noise. Like look at all the reds and greens in this area here that should be black, and compare it over here. So the D3300 definitely wins with a good lens attached to it. Now the main dial on the Nikons is on the back, kind of working by your thumb. On the Canons, you use your index finger to work the main dial, and this is kind of a divisive thing. You get used to one or the other. Now me, I've been a Canon guy for more than a decade, but I really prefer the main dial on the thumb. So this is going to be a lot of people's first cameras, and for me, I think I'd recommend most people go with the Nikon control system. Now there are other advantages and disadvantages between the systems, of course, but I really like the way the Nikon controls work. Now, one of the differences between the base model bodies and the higher end bodies is the number of buttons and dials that you have. And the D3300 is pretty sparse as far as the buttons go. It only has the one dial. It doesn't have a secondary dial. And there aren't dedicated buttons for ISO or other things. But I found that it's really not that much of a problem. It's nice to have a dedicated dial for exposure compensation, but with the D3300, you just push the plus minus button here and rotate this. This is unchanged on the D3200, and it's gonna work that same way on any camera, any Nikon camera that doesn't have secondary controls. Now, the Canon cameras do this exactly the same way, but the button placement is a little bit different, and I don't know, I just find that the Nikons work a little bit better, but they'll both get the job done just fine. Now let's talk a little bit about the lenses. Nikon also updated their kit lens to the Mark II version of their 18 to 55, 3.5 to 5.6 lens, and I can't tell any difference in the sharpness, but I sure can tell the difference in the weight of it, the weight and the size. Over here, we have the D3300, the smaller one, and this is the kit lens that came with the D3200. So these have the same focal length, the same speed, and you can see how much bigger this lens is, especially when collapsed. One of the changes that they made was There's now a separate mode that locks it closed, so you can see the L here. And if I want to actually take a picture, I have to push this button in and then rotate it. So 18 here is the widest setting, over to 55 here. But I really like that you can just make it smaller for storage if, for example, you're going to be throwing it in your bag. There are a few other changes from the D3200 to the D3300. The D3300 offers 5 frames per second, which is on par with the D5300, its big brother. The D3200 only had 4 frames per second. So you use frames per second if you're taking pictures of anything that's moving. For example, your kid's softball game or soccer game, or any kind of wildlife. Now, the 5 frames per second is definitely useful, but I wouldn't say that this is a great camera if you plan to do sports or wildlife. It's fairly limited in the number of focus points that it has, which limits you to your composition. Also, you're gonna have the best luck with that center focus point. If you upgrade to the higher end bodies, like the 5300 has many more focus points, and the 7100 has a pretty remarkable focus system. So if you plan to shoot action, you might take a look at one of those other cameras. Nonetheless, especially when using that center focus point, this is a competent camera as long as you keep that focus point right on your subject. You'll just have to shoot a little wider angle than you might otherwise and plan to crop later. Another big improvement with the D3300 is the video. Well, it seems like a minor improvement, but they jumped from 30 frames per second at 1080p up to 60 frames a second. The D5300 offered that same level of improvement. And why do you want that? Well, it's for slow motion cool effects. Now you can plan to show your video at 30 frames a second, which is the way most people watch video, and cut the speed of the video in half while keeping all the smoothness. So if you have basically any other DSLR and you're shooting at 30 frames a second, if you want to do slow motion, you can, but the video is going to be all jerky because you're going to see a slower number of frames. But with the D3300, you can go to half speed and maintain total smoothness with that slow motion. So that's going to be a really cool effect for things like sports. Big drawback to the video on the D3300, they have a mic jack, which is good, so you can put in an external mic. They do not have a headphone jack, so you can't monitor your sound, and that can be kind of important. You know, there might be some kind of buzzing or there might be interference on your mic or something. Good luck. But I think most people who are using this for video will plan to just use the on-camera mic, and they probably won't care that much about the sound. Another minor tweak is they included a slightly more powerful battery in the D3300. It's the same battery from the D5300. So that means you'll be able to take a few more shots. The batteries are actually compatible, so if you're upgrading, you could still keep your old battery and use it. It just doesn't have quite the same juice. All your old chargers will work too. The D3300 kit is $650, and that's not a small amount of change. And you should definitely take a look at some other cameras because there might be cameras that better suit your needs. Now, I think it's going to become my standard recommendation for people who are looking for a camera like this. But you might also consider the T3 that I mentioned in the photo studio, because that extra $250 might go better someplace else. In particular, with $250, you could get yourself a great flash to put on top of your camera, so you don't have to use the, the awful pop-up flash, which gives everybody a red eye. So check my photography buying guide for flash recommendations, but you can get an awesome flash that will dramatically improve your pictures and allow you to use bounce flash and flash modifiers for $125, $150, and that will make a huge difference. You might also put that $250 towards a really nice lens, like, for example, a 50mm f1.8, what they call the Thrifty 50 or the Fantastic Plastic. Those lenses will let you get that nice background blur that will make a huge difference in your pictures. Now, the 24 megapixels in this certainly looks better than those in the T3. It offers dramatically better image quality. But you're working with basically a 9 megapixel lens here. You're not going to appreciate the difference anyway. So if you're planning on sticking with the kit lens that comes with the camera, you might consider saving a few bucks and putting that extra cash towards accessories. All right, so why does Nikon include a 24 megapixel sensor if they give you a 9 megapixel lens? And the answer is it's largely a marketing effort, right? So 24 megapixels sounds a lot better than the 16 megapixels that you'll get on some of the comparable Canon cameras. Also, places like DxOMark do these really intricate sensor tests, and it's those tests that I can use to determine that the sensor in this thing produces images of the same quality as in my Mark III. But like I said, you won't ever appreciate that unless you get yourself some better glass. So, in other words, it's probably meaningless to you if you're going to use the kit. You don't care about that 24 megapixels. But if you plan to upgrade to some better glass, if you have good aspirations, if you're going to be, for example, a landscape photographer and you're going to buy yourself a nice Pro Prime wide-angle lens to put on there, then you will eventually be able to take advantage of it. But if you're going to stick with the kit lens, you might as well get yourself a T3 and put that money somewhere else. If you're set on Nikon, if for example you like the controls or you just like the Nikon lenses or maybe just have a history with them, the D3300 is still for sale. So this is a 3300, the third generation of their base model camera. The 3100, they still make it new and they charge about $400, which is about what Canon T3 will go for. So that's a nice alternative if you want to save some bucks and go with a lower megapixel sensor. Another advantage of the lower megapixel sensors is they don't take up as much room on your memory card. They also won't demand as much of your computer. So if you pull those pictures into Picasa and Lightroom and you show that Picasa's free, Picasa is going to churn through the lower megapixel pictures much faster than they would the 24 megapixel extremely detailed pictures that you'll be getting out of here. And once again, 24 megapixels with the kit lens, you're still only seeing about 9 megapixels of detail. So why waste the extra space? Now you can use this D3300 and go into the settings and choose a lower resolution if you just want to save some space and time on your computer. So I want to quickly go over the alternatives because I bet if you're looking at this camera, it's probably your first camera. And that means you might be open to switching to a different body or to different systems. So you should also look at the Canon SL1 besides the cameras that I've already mentioned. The SL1 is Canon's smallest camera and it's basically the smallest DSLR that you can buy. So it's a little smaller and lighter, but the sensor isn't as good. Again, you might not notice unless you put some better glass on it. You should also check out the D5300, which is about $250 more even with the same lens. The D5300 adds a whole bunch more focusing points and one of my favorite features, an articulating screen. You can flip the screen out so you can hold the camera down low and look at it from above, or you can hold it over your head and shoot over the crowd. You can flip it around to the front if you're taking a self-portrait or you plan to film yourself on video. The D5300 is also really new, so it has just about everything that we love about the D3300, plus that articulating screen and more focus points. This is the main display of the D3300. You can see Nikon's always good about this. They provide you just a really friendly user interface. This looks so much nicer than the display that the Canon cameras have, and it's one of the things that I really like about the Nikon. It quickly shows you all your settings here. Now, all of us promptly tried to touch the screen to change the settings, and this camera lacks a touchscreen, which is really too bad because so much of the competition does have a touchscreen, like the T5i and an awful lot of the mirrorless cameras, so you kind of get spoiled. You don't have a touchscreen, you have to navigate around with these little menu things, and we've been doing that for a decade, right? And it works okay, but touchscreen sure is nice and it really can make things move along a little bit quicker. Playback and review of pictures is pretty quick and works pretty well, and you can quickly zoom in. Now, again, this is one of those things that's easier on a touchscreen, but it's not too bad at all. The LV button here turns on live view so that you can see through the lens on the back of the display, and that's good if you want to hold the camera away from your face. I generally prefer to look through the viewfinder. Now, I will say, now that I've been kind of spoiled by using mirrorless cameras, I love how mirrorless cameras, most of them anyway, many of them, will automatically switch off the live view when you hold the camera to your face. I don't know why they don't build this into DSLRs. You have to manually turn off the live view and look through the viewfinder. Even on the base model camera, Nikon has thoughtfully put an AEL or AFL button on here, and this is reprogrammable. And what I'm going to tell you to do is to use it to turn on back button focus. If you haven't used back button focus before, it will change the way you take pictures, especially pictures of moving subjects and night photography, but I use the back button focus all the time. So check out chapter 4 of Stunning Digital Photography for detailed information about using back button focus. Now let's go through some of the menus on the camera. Here we see some traditional options for playback, and I want to point out this last menu item here. If you select it, it tells you that the option isn't available, and I always find that kind of frustrating, like if it's not available, just hide the menu from me, right? Well, this option becomes available if you decide to attach the Wi-Fi module to the D3300. And that's another feature that's kind of missing that we see in a lot of comparable cameras, especially mirrorless cameras tend to be a little more tech savvy and will have things like Wi-Fi built in. So if you decide to attach the Wi-Fi module, you can easily send pictures to your phone and then from your phone to Facebook. That's mostly what it's good for. It's good for tethered shooting too in a studio environment if you want to be able to instantly review the pictures. But I think most people just try to get their pictures online directly from the camera without having to hook it up to the computer. So that's a feature that I wish was built in. But you can get it if you're willing to spend $90 for the Wi-Fi module and you don't mind having it stuck in the side of your camera. An option that I think will work better for most people who want Wi-Fi is to get an iFi card. You can get these as cheap as $35. Now, this Nikon and most of the new Nikons and Canons too have a menu specifically for working with the iFi card that will allow you to selectively send pictures from the camera over to your smartphone so that you can post it on Facebook. It's not quite as flexible. It doesn't give you remote control over the camera like the Wi-Fi module does, but if you just want to get some pictures on Facebook, that's easier and cheaper, and it goes inside your camera, replaces your SD card, so you don't have to have something sticking out the side of your camera. The shooting menu gives you some control over how your camera takes pictures. You can see it supports RAW as well as RAW and JPEG at the same time. You can manually set the white balance if you want to. Now, it's kind of a pain to have to go into a menu to change the white balance, so I think most people who use this camera will probably just use the auto white balance. Frankly, if you're shooting RAW, it doesn't matter anyway. But that's one of the differences you'll see on the higher end cameras. They'll have a dedicated white balance button that will allow you to quickly change the white balance. So going into a menu is a little bit of a pain for that, but it's nice that it has the menu option there. The auto distortion control menu item will automatically detect some lenses and apply an effect to the picture to cancel out the distortion. So this is a really smart thing to do. It can lighten the corners if there's some vignetting. It can straighten out some of the warping. So if you're a person who shoots JPEG files, that can be really handy if you're using certain lenses. It can just improve the picture quality and basically make it look like you're using a higher quality lens than you actually are. If you shoot RAW like me, you can have those same effects applied automatically in, for example, Adobe Lightroom. One of the things I hate about these cameras is the bright white AF assist light. You kind of need it, however, because otherwise it won't be able to focus in low light. But if you decide that you don't want that light on, you can go ahead and shut it off. You might be forced to focus manually, however. Here we can see the video settings. Of course, I've got it at 1080p 60 just because I'm excited about being able to shoot at 60 frames a second. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't want to copy every picture to your computer for editing, if you don't take it that serious, you can do a lot of in-camera editing here. It's especially useful if you want to immediately toss a picture onto Facebook through the Wi-Fi module, or if you're the type who just hits the replay button and shows everybody your pictures on the back of the camera, but you don't want to be stuck with the standard colors. If you want to go black and white, for example, or provide some sort of special effect. It's also good if, for example, the white balance turned out to be off. You can go in, fix the white balance in camera without ever using a computer. Now, the D3300 does not have this, but you can go in and switch to the effects mode, and it kind of walks you through the process, and it works out pretty well. So I switch to the effects mode, and I'll just go through the playback menu here. That's our mannequin that we use to get the light set up, and I'll scroll down and find an actual picture. So I can just hit the I button here and it'll pop up a menu. I can select a rating, which is useful if you do use computers and you want to be able to quickly find the picture. Take a great picture, you can set it to 5 stars, and then once you get into Lightroom or Picasso, you'll be able to sort it by rating. But I'll go into the retouch menu here. And for example, you have lots of common editing tasks. You can straighten it, you can crop it, you can go to monochrome. So we'll just give it a quick crop. Now, this is kind of the area where a little bit of a touch screen would make life a lot easier, right? So let's say I wanted to go for a little bit of a tighter crop. Bang, there I go, I just cropped it. So here we can see the before and after. Of course, it saves the output as a JPEG. It can't actually do it to the RAW file. Lots of cheesy special effects that you can do too. Oh, look, I can make Chelsea a drawing. I don't know why you'd want to do that. I hate that stuff, but you have lots of cool options that you can do, and sepia tones and things like that. So we really like the D3300, and frankly, it's amazing how much camera you can get for $650 nowadays. It's completely packed with features. The red color is appalling. The controls are completely useful and naturally placed. You get access to this incredibly wide selection of Nikon lenses, which is something that you won't be able to get in a lot of other, say, mirrorless camera bodies or within the Sony DSLR system. So overall, we do highly recommend the D3300. If you like this video and you want to see more free reviews or videos showing you how to take great pictures, subscribe to my channel. It's absolutely free. I'd also appreciate it if you gave this video a like. Questions for me, just add a comment down below. And there's tons more video just like this in my photography buying guide, which you can get at Amazon or at my own website, sdpcommunity.com. Thanks so much.